Welcome to the Unschooling the Mind podcast, where we unravel all of the beliefs and deep conditioning that has been programmed into our mind through decades of infiltration by institutions, media, and governments of whom we no longer trust. In an attempt to heal ourselves and free our children from the same circumstances, we bravely face the rabbit holes that we have been incessantly warned not to explore. My name is Tasha Fishman, and I was a regular Matrix mummy, previously trapped on planet mind control like everyone around me, until the absurdity of the 2020 mandates and public health measures which hit the school system. I took my kids running and never looked back. Unschooling them and myself has led to a new reality. I was forced to shed my old beliefs and birth a new version of myself, a former recovering people pleaser all the way to the Canadian trucker convoy. I didn't know this was in the cards, but here I am today as an unschooling advocate, public speaker, and the founder of the International Unschooling the Mind private community. My life is unrecognizable today, but I wouldn't change a thing. So let's get into it, friends, and unschool our minds together. Welcome, Julie Behling, to the episode of Unschooling the Mind, the podcast in our community. Really happy that you are here. You and I connected quite a few months ago, actually, about your release, because I'm friends and I'm on the Mom Army, and Seek kind of made an introduction, and you've actually produced this, and it is coming out to release very soon. And it was actually one of the most controversial posts. I put it on my Instagram and I couldn't believe the comments. Like, I wasn't really expecting it. I took your clip, I shortened it a little bit, showing Seek and kind of the part about education and, true to my page. And people were just irate that I was making any inference to a communistic takeover. And I mean, not everyone. Of course, people were bang on. Absolutely, yes. But a big portion of the comments were complete disbelief. You're an idiot. You have no idea what communism really is. There is nothing here to see. Right. And so it's kind of mind-boggling. And I don't know about you, and we'll get into this. I feel a lot I'm in an echo chamber. I'm so vocal that I attract people that, don't necessarily agree with me all the time, but they think like me and they can see what's coming. So when I get that, I'm always mind smacked, like, and I guess that's probably the majority of the population, right? So anyway, welcome, Julie. Really excited to get into your story. Maybe you can kind of just give us a little background. You have such an interesting story about how you started unschooling your mind and how you came to be this producer of this great new documentary that's coming out.
I didn't start unschooling my mind. I feel like God drop kicked me out of the box that I was in. And it happened on multiple levels. My first break with mainstream thought had to do with the medical system, because so I was a missionary in Russia and I came back, and then I became partially disabled with 2 autoimmune illnesses for 6 years. And nothing that I went to the doctor every month for a year. The first year I was sick. The only thing they had for me was here's a prescription for Zoloft. That's gonna, I'm 25 years old. I can't walk up a flight of stairs without being in bed the whole next day. Don't think Zoloft is gonna fix that for me.
Right.
I was healthy previously. So, and I was able to get my health back with holistic healing and nutritional stuff and taking responsibility. But that was the first thing. And then in graduate school, studying communism, and I'd already lived in Russia, having been a missionary there, seeing what the aftermath of communism did to people, and then learning what really actually happened. And then it wasn't until a few years later that I started seeing the same things happening in America that I had researched. So I wrote my master's thesis on underground Christian movements in the Soviet Union and their survival tactics and the tactics of the Soviet state to try to dismantle Christianity. And of course, the Soviets, they hated Jews. They hated especially the secular Jews fit right, a lot of them fit right in the Soviet Union. But the religious Jews were very heavily persecuted as well in the Soviet Union. because the only religion that they wanted was the state religion of communism. So, but I studied that plan to dismantle Christianity. I started seeing it happening in America. Took a closer look. I saw all of the tactics that I had researched to try to destroy Christianity happening in America, and began researching for my book, which I usually have on this shelf right here. I just sold my last hard copy of it, so I don't have one to show you. But Beneath Sheep's Clothing, the Communist Takeover of Culture in the USSR and Parallels in Today's America is the full name of the book. I published it 2 years ago. It was, from start to finish, 20 years in process, that book was. And then, yeah, I don't want to keep jabbering on and on, but that's just a little bit of the nutshell, at least of how I came to write the
Yeah.
book.
So when you say when you went over there, for
Mhm.
those of us who haven't been there, and you say, and then I found out what really happened and I
Mhm.
saw the damage. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Like what
Sure.
really happened and what are we being told that happened?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm comparing it to what I was told growing up about the Soviet Union. I was told communism is bad, the people aren't free, which is true. Those things are both true. But I didn't know, I'd never look, we all learned about the Holocaust in grade school, rightfully so. And every child in America in school learns about the Holocaust because we don't want a repeat of that. I was shocked when I found out about the Gulag. And I found out about the Gulag living in Russia, meeting people who had survived the Gulag, did not know what it was, and then coming back and then going to graduate school and studying Soviet history in depth. My major professor I got two master's degrees at the same time, Russian language and literature and Russian and East European studies. My major professor for my Russian literature in that department was a Soviet dissident who escaped the Soviet Union by the skin of her teeth in the 1970s. Like, it was a complete fluke how she was able to get out. She actually threatened to set herself on fire publicly and on the steps of the American embassy in Moscow if the Soviet government wouldn't give her an exit visa. And the day before she was going to go through with that, she was granted the exit visa. So
Wow.
she hated communism. We studied the literature of the Soviet dissidents. I took that class the same semester I took Soviet history, and I cried every day because I saw a lot of traumatized elderly people in particular that I had met when I was in Russia. People who had been, and this man is in the film actually, this man named Carl, both legs amputated, very, very hard of hearing. It's very hard to be disabled in Russia, at least especially back in the late 90s. There was nothing for disabled people. And he had not only he'd fought in the World War II for the Soviets against the Nazis. He was put in a Nazi POW camp. He was captured. He was liberated from the Nazi POW camp only to be put in the Gulag because, according to the Soviet thought, he was in a Nazi POW camp. Therefore, he could be collaborating with the Nazis. So now then his own people persecute him and put him in the Gulag, which was, I'm sure, worse than the Nazi POW. It wasn't better. It definitely wasn't better. And just meeting people, I met people whose parents were arrested by Stalin's regime, and they were young children and living in terror. Just the things that occurred, I didn't know. I didn't know a mass torture and traumatization of a populace. And come to find out that's what communism does everywhere that it takes power.
Mm.
The same, and this is another thing that people need to know about communism. Not the death toll is the deadliest form of government in the world's history. They kill their own people. They starve their own people. They torture their own people. Uh, but not only that, it mutates to take over whatever society that is the target. So what we had in the Soviet Union mutated to be able to take over in China. And then it mutated further for other things. It mutated to take over in Latin America. So what we have now is a very highly mutated version of, it's more Marxism. We don't have communism yet, but Marxism, we have very heavy Marxist infiltration. And the Marxism it's a playbook that prepares a society to fall to communism. Now, and I will also say the communism of today is also different because it's more like what we see in China. It's more like a communist fascist, like hybrid, where they don't do away with all business, but the government controls the businesses. Whereas in the Soviet Union, they did away with it, was the government ran everything. And they had that command economy. The command economy didn't work. We probably will never see that again. But the communist playbook is a control grid for the people to keep the masses down, to consolidate all power in a few hands. And that's what we see in communist China. That's what we see with the globalist initiatives. And they always do it under the guise of really nice sounding things.
Mm-hmm.
So like in the Soviet Union, it was like, oh, we're going to give bread, peace, and land to the peasants, the poor oppressed peasants. We're going to liberate you from oppression with bread, peace, and land. Peace, I mean, tens of millions of dead bodies everywhere. Land, no, they forcibly took the land from the people. Bread, mass starvation,
Mm-hmm.
mass starvation in the Soviet Union, mass starvation in China for that matter. So, but the Marxist playbook, I guess it's more correct to say we have a Marxist takeover, a neo-Marxist, woke neo-Marxist takeover in the West. And as you are aware, in Canada, it's worse. In
Mm-hmm.
Canada, even than it is in the US, you guys are a little bit ahead of the game of us. But the Marxist playbook is this oppressed versus oppressor dynamic, where you located people, a group of people who are oppressed or who can be made to feel oppressed or who were oppressed historically, stoke their grievance, stoke anger, stoke resentment, cause them to violently tear down the systems of power. And then in that power vacuum, that's when the communists can come in and take control and have all of the power consolidated in a small group at the top. Whereas in the American system, and I'm sure Canada was something similar, America, it's a decentralization of powers. That's how our founding fathers set up our government, because the more that power you give to a tiny group of people, the more that can be exploited for tyranny and totalitarianism. That's always the consolidation of power in a few hands. It always leads to totalitarianism. So by spreading out the power and decentralizing, it's harder to have totalitarianism in that way. But what we have now, greater and greater consolidation of powers away from the people. And now we have like the UN, World Economic Forum, these globalist entities seeking to set up their global government. The global government that the people don't vote for them.
Mm-hmm.
They're not beholden to the people in any way, shape, or form. They're just going to seize control. That they will if we don't stop them. I think we can stop them. They want to seize control. They want to like be like, oh, but we're gonna eradicate poverty and we're gonna eradicate inequality and all these things with our little tiny elite at the top. Just give us your money and just obey us, and everything will be great.
Yeah. And it's always under the premise of paycheck mind control, because these ruling groups, these elite groups, a small group of people have mind control powers and powers, financial powers over the military, over the police, over the people who protect them, and then
Yeah.
actually pursue the legislation that they're putting forth, right? Like, how does a small group of people take all of that land from the Soviets? So back it up and tell us a little bit about, like, where are the Soviets today? Like, do there's some that are in trauma. Is the younger generation aware? Do they know that, like, is this a never again thing? Like, where are they at? Do they,
Former
what's your,
Soviet citizens, the Russian populace. Well, I mean, I honestly think this war between Russia and Ukraine, I think that there's unresolved traumas that are showing up in a different form. That's not a logic. That's not like I can't point to like evidence to say that. That's my feeling. Like from the time that I was studying Soviet history after having been there, I was like, these people are traumatized and the trauma is not being dealt with. They're just kind of brushing it under the rug and moving on with life. I was like, it's going to show up somehow in some way. And I think that's what we're seeing here, although there's more to it than that, obviously. Um, I mean, the younger generations are not traumatized per se. Um, I think that can be passed down through the DNA too, though. They're
Mhm.
not as traumatized as a lot of the older people I met. So, but and there are still some hardcore communists. I mean, we have hardcore communists in the West too, but there are some hardcore communists still over there. Um, but I mean, the quality of life of the people is way, way, way better than what it was when I was there in the late 90s. And I mean, the average person was making $30 a month in Russia when I was there in 97, 98. And now they have it's much closer to a European, standard of living for the people of Russia. Ukraine, of course, is being decimated as we speak, and it's horrifying. But I mean, the people of Russia have embraced freedom to a large extent. Putin is an authoritarian. I mean, there's a lot of complicating things. I'm not an expert on modern Russia so much uh, as I have researched. I haven't researched with primary sources like I have certain
Mm-hmm.
aspects of
Mm-hmm.
Soviet history, but that's just my take on it.
But basically, what you're saying is that the same neo-Marxist playbook is being played out here in the West. Like we are actually watching this unfold, like the beginning steps, the middle steps. I mean, it's pretty clear in Canada that we have an ultimate dictatorship and that people are under a spell of mind control of sorts into accepting these radical notions of giving away their freedoms for the greater good. Like, I mean, these are the million Trojan horses coming in from the LGBTQI plus a movement being one of them, right? To save the children from themselves and I guess their parents who want to beat them for being gay. There's one narrative right there. The other one is to save them from the medical mafia from viruses. You need to give up your and it's interesting that you talk about trauma being swept under the rug because there's this gaslighting going on, right? And I'm sure it was the same in Russia, and it's definitely in Canada. People are just like, "Oh, we're so tired of COVID. Let's just move on." I'm like, "Move on? Do you guys not know that these principles are just suspended? What are we moving on from? We haven't even dealt with it, let alone move on." Like, and it literally is the most dysfunctional, toxic way of dealing with as a culture with any kind of trauma. Of course, this is going to come back out. And I feel like the cycle that you're talking about is the endless cycle of oppressor versus the oppressed. And as long as the puppeteers at the top can keep us moving into that cycle, fighting each other, divided, they will always conquer. They can
Yeah.
manipulate and socially engineer us into where they want us to go just by that.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, the three tactics that I researched in depth that I go to in the book and the film to take Judeo-Christian ethics and Christianity away from the Soviet people and put in the Marxist and the communism. Number one is propaganda. Gaining control over all the education, all the media, the arts, and everything. And it was so draconian in the Soviet Union that they were executing poets and artists and even scientists who didn't properly praise the Soviet regime. And can you hear me? Am I?
You
Because it
kind
looks like
of
you're
left for a
frozen.
bit, but you're good now.
Okay. So yeah. So, execution of writers and poets, that was a thing very common in the earlier decades of the Soviet Union, especially. And then with the propaganda, then you have infiltrating the churches. It's really infiltrating all of the cultural institutions in America and the West. So we have infiltrated education, religion, media, the legal system, and the institution of the family have all been very carefully and specifically infiltrated in order to weaken them from within so that communism can take hold. This was the plan of Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist Marxist. From like the 1920s. And that was his plan to overtake the West, because he was despondent at that time that the West was not falling to communism. It was just the peasants in Russia that had fallen. So he's like, we've got to weaken the West's cultural making institutions because they're too strong. They're too repellent to communism. So we have this weakening and this moral weakening as well. That's part of overtaking the media, is to morally degrade the society. A morally depraved society is easier to control as well as a dumbed down society. And I mean, what are the solutions? We need to get educated to understand these agendas. And so we can say we're not doing that. Like with COVID, if enough people are like, I'm never masking again, not doing it, never taking whatever this recommended medical thing is that they put pushing down our throats, not doing it. I know where I live, enough, most of the people, that's the stance that we have. We're just not doing that kind of stuff ever again. So if we get to that point with waking up enough of the populace to understand this Marxist playbook, once you understand it and see it, you can see it on repeat over and over and over with like the Palestinian, the free Palestine thing,
Totally.
another retooling of it. Also like climate justice is
Mhm.
another retooling, and radical feminism too, for that matter. So
Mhm.
among other things. So once you see this pattern, it harps on. So communist, so the Marxist playbook, it plays on that human part of human nature that is jealous. But now what they've done in the West is they've weaponized our empathy
Mhm.
against people who are underprivileged, because underprivileged people is a reality. It's a fact. There are people who are underprivileged. There always have been. And in the West, we care more about underprivileged people than probably any other society in the world's history. But now that empathy is weaponized to get us to support chopping off, healthy body parts of children in the name of, helping the underprivileged and all sorts of other crazy things. So we need to understand the playbook, get the word out. We can nullify these agendas if enough people know what they are.
Yeah, it's interesting that, when we say weaponize our empathy, but when we really look even deeper at it, it's more about using mind control to get people to virtue signal to the bigger herd, right?
Yeah,
Because, it's disguised as empathy and people think I'm just really empathetic and I just really care about the climate. And what you actually care about is the opinion and the acceptance of the bigger herd. And the bigger herd has been captured by this small group of ruling elite class families who have bought the media, who pay for the propaganda, who are doing all of that virtue signaling. So it really comes from that subconscious part of our brain who really wants acceptance, right?
it's
And
true.
to be loved. And it's actually extremely selfish when you think of it, right? The people
Well,
that have put their neck out on the lines to speak truth or to put a flag of warning to their fellow humanitarians that have been villainized and demonized are actually the ones with empathy, willing to be persecuted at all costs for
totally.
their
That's
fellow human.
Yeah, I mean, and then I think it's useful to look at, I have the different levels of communist enabler or Marxist enablers in America and in general in the West. And I have 5 levels. And I
Mhm.
think it's useful to look at what those levels are. 3 of these levels were J. Edgar Hoover, who's the former FBI director in America who was anti-communist. And then I added 2 more. It's a pyramid. The very top of the pyramid is the puppet masters and the money bags of the agendas. These, mega like Rockefeller Foundation type entities. Next level down, avowed communists, a very tiny group. Um, they're avowed communists. The next level down is much bigger. It's the progressives and leftists, the fellow travelers with the communists, the socialists, the democratic socialists, and just liberal, a lot of liberals too. They agree with the communists on some things. They don't agree with a violent overthrow of violent revolution of society, but they agree with the communists in a lot of things. They actually do more to push these agendas that are communist friendly than the communists themselves, these
Mhm.
fellow travelers. Next level down is the dupes. And I separate the dupes into level 1 dupes and level 2 dupes. Level 1 dupes are the ones that believe the lines. And I know people like this. I know some really good people who are legitimate dupes to the agendas because they do believe Black Lives Matter and they don't want their fellow citizens to be oppressed. And it sounds nice. Yes, they're going to go on the protest for BLM and they're going to teach their children to be anti-racist because they really, some of them genuinely think this is good. Um, then we have the level 2 dupes who are the people that are like, something's not quite right here, but they don't speak out about it. They don't want to be canceled. They don't want to lose their jobs. And so they just keep quiet. So, and they're also enabling these agendas by saying
Mhm.
nothing. So you have those 5 groups, and some people might be like in a spectrum between some of them, but that's
Oh
so
gosh, that's fascinating. I love that you're depicting that. We'll have to take a look at that. And I love that you use dupes because I'll often talk about how part of my unschooling my own mind and becoming public was admitting that I had been duped, is sharing my experience of all of the facets in my life where, oh my gosh, I actually did that to myself. I actually did, like having breast implants, for example, and getting them taken out immediately when I woke up to the medical, absurdity of what happened and realizing how is that any different than me believing that this was safe and effective and now I'm tied to the system with these implants. I got to get these things out, right? Like, so I mean, but that was a program. But I think that people are terrified to admit that they've been duped. I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. If we can get to a space of realizing that we're all a victim of
We're all duped.
circumstance. We've all been duped, right? And we can like hold space for each other in that and actually not look at it like something that is, shameful, but something that is like, wow, look at where we are now. What an unveiling that's happening here and find one another. We could
Yes.
get through this because you're right. It's the dupes that are the ones that are really pushing this, just like the ones who stayed silent in COVID and got the fake vaccine card and like just decided they didn't want to lose their job, right? They're the ones. And I think we hear that about communism, right? Like even with the Holocaust, it's, you know, the good people who turned a blind eye that let all of this happen because they
Yes.
can't do to us what they want to do just by sheer numbers alone.
Right.
That's all it takes. So we have a pandemic of cowardice in our
Yes.
countries, and that's
Yeah.
the real issue.
And complacency,
Mhm.
because look, our generation in the Western nations had the cushiest existence in like the entire history of the world.
Mhm.
And we've had more, mind-numbing media
Mhm.
exposure since early childhood. So, and we have not experienced hardships in the way that most of the rest of people in the history of the world have. My parents, they were born during like the Great Depression. Like my parents are kind of old. And but like the generation, like I would say, like, boomers and on, and maybe there was some with Vietnam War, but like I was born, actually, my claim to fame is the Vietnam War ended the day after I was born. I found that out when I was studying American history. But I've not known war. I've not known, there are some, I guess some people have gone off to war to Iraq and various places, but we've had this cushy existence. There's this cognitive dissonance. People cannot comprehend that we could be in any danger of the types of tyranny that we've, learned about in other countries. It doesn't register, especially when you have the media propaganda constantly, talking about stupid, frivolous things. And back to that, one of the most toxic things that the media on the right does that drives me absolutely bonkers is to constantly make fun of people on the left.
Mm.
Because
Mhm.
the left, of course, is always making fun of people on the right. If we're
Mhm.
constantly mocking each other,
Mhm.
that keeps people
Yeah.
separated, polarized, and it keeps us from coming together if we're constantly making fun of each other.
Yeah. And the people at the top are laughing. Perfect. They're right in our clutches. Keep them divided. Same thing with the war with Palestine and Israel. I'm Jewish. And, of course I'm going to be upset about what's going on. And I don't like seeing people protesting, death to the Jews. I have children. My children are Jewish. Like, but I'm not going to just stand with Israel. I don't believe that the Israeli government has got the best interest of the people. I'm sorry. I don't believe they didn't know. I don't believe Netanyahu all of a sudden who tried to vax his own people and segregated his own people with a medical apartheid is like didn't know this was happening. I'm sorry. I'm beyond that. I'm not saying I know what happened, but I
Right,
know it's not what they're telling us. And I'm
right.
not going to play in their game and stand with Palestine or stand with Israel. It's like, no. How about we start looking up at who's shaking the jar? Like, can
Yeah,
we all do that, please? Because
yeah,
this is the exact same pattern, the exact same. If you didn't stand with BLM, then you're a racist. If you don't believe in climate, you're a racist. It just, I mean, it's getting so absurd, I think, to those of us who are awake and aware that it's mind-boggling to see people still stuck in it. But here we are. And so tell me, Julie, who is against you? Like, is there anyone that believes what you're saying is absolute nonsense, hogwash, no way? And have you had conversations in that realm?
yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. So I have three older siblings, and then one of my brothers came to our premiere of the documentary Beneath Sheep's Clothing just 2 days ago in Phoenix. And he considers himself a moderate Republican in that he likes John McCain and Mitt Romney. and he watches mainstream news, and he has seen me as a conspiracy theorist for many, many years. And in fact, even when I published my book and I handed it to him, I was like, hey, this is my book that I published. He dismissed it, set it down, didn't even open it, didn't even look at it. It's like conspiracy theory rubbish. That was his assumption. Well, he came to the film premiere and he came up to me afterwards. He's like, yeah, I mean, I think what you have in here, I think it's right. I think it's true. Because my brother does hate DEI. He works in different corporations in America. He has for his whole career, and he loathes DEI.
Okay.
And he does see how like the equity and like, yeah, it's
How they're
communist.
using it, how they're
Yeah.
using it.
So that was his hook where he was open, and he was like, yeah, I think you guys are pretty much right on in the film. So I think actually the number one group of people against me are Marxist operatives.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I've had some encounters. I've had some thinly veiled death threats, even for my book. When my book was out, when I was discussing it in a interview platform here in Utah, that on the radio, I had some strange things happen. I had security cameras up at my house. I had some people wandering and loitering around my premises. And I've had some operatives online tear me to shreds. So the Marxists really hate me.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting for a group that wants equality for all and hides behind, compassion. Like they're the ones that are always the most hateful seemingly, or really do want to destroy, right? It's a program. You're watching a program. I'm still amazed that and tell us about this, being up here in Canada, that there hasn't been more retribution against BLM. I mean, they've declared themselves Marxist organizers. The money, Candace Owens did a documentary on the money that
Yeah.
was gone, the destruction they've created. And that's just kind of under the rug, moving on and on to the next.
Apparently so. I mean, I guess the anniversary of George Floyd dying, which, the death of anyone is a sad thing, but that was just recently. And there were some of these operatives that were like bringing out the violins, but the pushback against them was huge though
Was
on
it?
social
Yeah.
media. Yes. And so they're still trying to milk that, but they're not, I don't think they're going to get much more traction, but they've got more stuff waiting. So I interviewed James Lindsay, did several interviews with James Lindsay for Beneath Sheep's Clothing. And if anyone who's not aware of him, he's really one of probably he and Trevor Loudon, who is also in my film, are pretty much the two top experts on communist infiltration into the West. And James, this was a part of the film that we had to cut because we just had too much. We had like 8 hours of amazing hard-hitting content, and we couldn't have an 8-hour film, obviously. But he talked about George Floyd and how they used that as like a spark to like try to launch the revolution. And then he talked about drag Floyd, how he's like, okay, they're gonna like they want to get like footage of like a conservative shoving a drag queen or being rude, and then they'll use that to show that all the conservatives are so hateful and to push the queer Marxist agenda further. Well, he calls it Jorge Floyd, that the southern border of the United States, with all the migrants coming through, that there's going to be something happen somewhere where a migrant gets treated improperly or has a sad situation, that life in America is not that great for them. And then they'll again have to show the conservatives, and that even that citizenship in America is oppressive,
Right.
that because these poor people don't have their citizenship, and look how they're being oppressed. So we need to do away with American citizenship so that everyone can have all the things, and that we're not oppressing these people. And it's just this constant same pattern over and over and over again. And look, these young college kids,
Mm,
they're brainwashed.
I
They're
know.
they're not, it's not their fault. Like, I don't have anything against any of them. Um, they've been used and abused,
They've been
and they're
used
just
as
acting
pawns.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
it's so fascinating because that's the number one question I get. Well, what do you mean you're unschooling your kids? What about university? And I'm like, I pray my kids don't want to go to university. Are you kidding me? Like, please find a trade, be an entrepreneur. Let's do anything else but that. And I mean, if this isn't an unveiling with the whole war in Palestine and Israel, like just showing that these kids have no idea. And, when I think about myself, when I was in university, I was a proclaimed feminist. I had no idea. I was buying into their bullshit, toxic masculinity and all of the other things, right? It's like
Mhm.
constant. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to unfold. So, what would you say, Julie, are the things that, because it's great to be able to say, okay, here's the correlation, this is happening, and then the average bear just shuts down the prefrontal cortex because they believe that this is a great documentary, there's nothing I can do about it. What would you say?
Yeah, well, look, in the film and also in my book, there's a little section for solutions, but what we're doing, we're actually putting together a movement that will be, it's called the People's Network, and it's going to be to bring together all these people who have these solutions. And we're going to be putting out information, a different module each month once the film is out. Most of the information, a lot of it will be completely free, but to show people what to do. So the first module will be on getting Marxism out of the schools. The
Mm,
second one will be alternative education.
mhm,
I personally, as you know, homeschool my son.
mhm,
Um, but with getting the Marxism out of the schools, we're going to have information for parents, what parents can do, information for people in the system, in the education system, how they can throw sand in the gears and how they can stand up. And then also information for people who deal with legislation to
mhm,
like how to get the right legislation passed in your state. So and we're talking with people, it's not just me and my colleague who are like going to make up all the solutions. We're working with people who are experienced people on the ground who are getting things done, who are getting results.
mhm,
So, but as far as what can we do as average parents, pulling our kids from the schools and protecting them is number one if we
mhm,
have kids. And number two is getting really clear on these issues and helping wake up other people. Those are the things that it's like across the board, and I know some people can't pull their kids from school. I have a friend who is divorced and her divorce, her kids have to be in school because of her divorce decree, because her ex-husband doesn't support
mhm,
homeschool. So, but she is I actually have some lessons I've put together. The first one is free. It's called Why Does Freedom Matter? People can teach their kids to understand these principles and concepts, to understand what totalitarianism is, what the features are, how it works, and also kind of give them a primer on the woke agendas so they don't fall into those traps. Um, Kind of like an inoculation against those agendas, although preferable to not put our kids in that position to begin with.
yeah, especially when they're little, they don't really stand a chance. But no,
Yeah.
that's something that we work on in the Unschooling the Mind Academy too, is like I'm working on a little program on how to unschool the mind of yourself and your children, even if they're in public school, because there's a plethora of reasons that they're not being pulled out. And even as they get older and they want a school experience because the alternative realm isn't fully built yet, like all these things that everyone's got great ideas, but we're still in the middle of this war. Nothing is really concrete and built and stable. So people are scrambling when they're,
Yeah.
for all sorts of reasons. So I love that you're putting together modules. I love that you're, connecting with community to find solutions. I mean, that is really proactive and a beautiful, beautiful work that you're doing in the community. I thank you for that. We appreciate you.
Yeah,
So,
the website for that is peoplesnetwork.us. If anyone wants to get on the list to get email updates and when we start sending out the information. And of course, for the documentary, it's beneathsheepsclothing.movie, and people can watch the trailer there. We are negotiating with a large streaming platform right now, um, and which is delaying the release of the film, but some pretty big things are in the works that will be promoting it to kind of a mainstream conservative audience here in America, which I'm super excited about. I mean, I'm
that's
hoping
great.
I see this film, the book and the film, as a cluster bomb, because we
Yeah.
are in war. It's a cluster bomb. It's I feel like, look, this timing is perfect for the maximal impact of the maximal waking up of people at just the right moment, like at the last possible minute. And I hope people will watch it when it's out, and people can get on the list to get notified when it's out. They can pre-order tickets as well. And there's also a link to my to buy my book. If anyone wants to grab the book off of beneathsheepsclothing.movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll put all that in the show notes. It's really important that we support people like yourself who are doing the good works and throwing those truth bombs out there in these kinds of formats and mediums, right? To combat what we're dealing with, especially for our kids, because we're competing with Netflix, we're keep competing with textbooks and social media and all of these billionaire technocrats who have these agendas against us. So we need these types of mediums to relay the message. So absolutely, I'll have all that stuff for people to find you and support you, and we want to support you. So last but not least, give us your impression of what us, Canadians. What's I mean, you have the impression that we're far even more ahead. I mean, we are. We don't have the Bill of Rights. We're supposed to, but nobody adheres to it. Our charter means nothing. We're under the rules still of the monarchy, right? And we have a bunch of sleepers who have had such a comfy life the last couple generations. Like you said, the cognitive dissonance is there. What do you see with going on with Canada?
Well, your president, Castro.
Yeah, Prime Minister. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I
playing
don't
the
know.
role of his life, right?
Yeah, so he's pretty bad, and not much better with Biden right now. I mean, what happened with the whole trucker incident? Bank accounts was shut down and people arrested. Of course, we had January 6th, we had arrests with that in America. It's, I think everyone says Canadians are like the nicest people, and maybe you guys have been too nice.
Yeah, maybe we're the king and queen of dupes. We're the dupes, right? Like really. I feel like it was such a big setup, right? They made us believe in school that our American counterparts were ignorant and uneducated and loudmouth soup, and that we were so progressive and sophisticated, and that you should always travel with your Canadian flag on your armband on your backpack because people love Canadians because we're just so polite and we're peacekeepers and blah blah blah. And it was just an absolute setup to actually come in, take us over so they can infiltrate you guys. That's what I think. Like if we start talking about territory and land, like what better to take over Canada and come into the States, right? And
Totally.
then of course they're attacking your southern border. So you're getting it from both ends. And it's right now just still at a mental level, but it's alarming to me how sleepy, sheepy our, beautiful Canadian brothers and sisters are still at this time. I mean, there is an awakening happening, but boy, it's a slow burn. So
I mean, there's a lot of Russians, like like people, former Soviet citizens in Canada. Now,
mhm.
are any of them awake? Because I've met a lot of former Soviet citizens in America who are awake. But
Yeah, there are. I mean, there really is. It's just that we are so spread out and we don't have the population to come together. That's why the convoy was so huge. So
right.
many of us traveled so far to get there in the middle of winter, right? I mean, it's just like epic. But they've just been at this for a long time and Canadians have been so apathetic to this. I mean, we're at a 60% tax. I mean, if that doesn't show you that we have pirates that are, running the show I mean, but this is generationally passed down. Plus, we're
Right.
so chemically laden. Like you said, it's not just the propaganda, but it's the chemicals. It's 6 a.m. I'm out there this morning. I'm sure it's the same for you. Two huge chemtrail like planes competing with each other to make the biggest lines in the sky. Now we have no sun right now. I mean, it's just like what are they? I mean, I'm tired of being gaslit about the chemtrails. Like,
Me too.
if I see the word contrail one more time, I'm like, just I'm done. So it's just like rapid fire. But I think the most important thing that you said is if you can get your kids out of the school system, then we have to start working on our own self and our own conditioning and our own mind. The kids will be fine if we get them out. If they have to be in, then we have to believe in prayer, in the power of prayer, and that they're there for a reason. And we have to be an army around them, like you said, throw the sand in the grind, right? Like get in there, be the one at the boardrooms, right? There's a place for everybody, I think, in this war.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's so we're going to be offering with the People's Network, a lot of like tactics and different things. Not that every person will get involved with everything. So, but that people can see what types of things are available and useful for them to do and what do they resonate with. Because everyone has a different purpose. We all have a different purpose. And if we can find a way that we're making a positive difference, to expose these agendas and to build up something that will be healthy for our society, a healthy culture, a healthy society, a healthy political system, instead of the communism that's developing, then everyone can find their spot. And then I definitely recommend, if people are praying types, meditating types, to really tune in and find out, what your role is. The third module we're putting out will be on how to get Marxism out of the churches. I go into depth in my book and the film, the infiltration of the churches in America, but it's not just America. It's the world. The churches have been heavily infiltrated to
Huge,
control
huge.
the populace. Yeah.
And we saw it with version 1.0 with COVID. Not, them taking the bait, shutting down. I mean, it's just that it's so clear. But I guess for some people, they need to move to the 2.0 version and kind of see like, oh, it's happening with this. We've got like the tranny flags up at the pew now. We've got, so it's yeah, whatever it takes.
I met this woman from this women really cool women's organization that they're from a Christian point of view, that they're activating women to protect the children. And she's also, I guess, a pastor. And she said that she asked God, when are Christians going to wake up? Um, Maybe the same thing for Jews. Well, the Jews should be waking up now. Oh my gosh, but when will Christians wake up? And she said that the answer she got was from the spirit was, when they start taking your kids.
Ugh.
Now they kind of are starting to do that, but no one's trying to take my kid from me yet.
Yeah, yeah,
So let's
yeah.
not get to that point though. My gosh.
I know. We've got a mom in our community just reached out to me from Australia this morning and said that she's been busy the last 2 weeks fighting their state was trying to take outlaw homeschooling, and her and 20,000 other moms took to the streets, and they've been able to push them back. So this is a win. We can do this. We need to be able to have these conversations. I mean, this is all I could talk about this all day. Like, this is all I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about your small talk. I don't want to talk about, the bad apples at the grocery store. I don't even want to talk about inflation. I mean, inflation is tied to this. I want to talk about this all the time. So wherever you can have dialogue, create a bridge with somebody. And it's not to fight. We have to stop with the fighting. And if somebody's that program that you just move away from them onto the next, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Julie, I'm going to be mindful of our time. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
We put prayer over you and your family of protection because you're doing the good work in this fight. And thank you so much. And we'll have all of that. We're going to support you in this endeavor, and we want to see more good works from you. We're going to stop now and move into our private Q&A portion with the Unschooling the Mind Academy and say goodbye to our folks on the podcast. So thank you, Julie. Thank you so much, friends. If you like the content that I am producing amongst a sea of censorship, please like, review, and share. If you are looking for support to pull your kids from the system and start your own Unschooling the Mind journey with an international online community of like-minded souls who are doing the same thing as you, head over to my website at tashafishman.com for all the details. To create strong communities right where you are, it starts with you. Thank you. Clear eyes, open heart, can't lose. See you next time.